So what will it take for the world's two largest economies to actually reach a deal? Neysun Mahboubi is a research scholar at the Center for the Study of Contemporary China at the University of Pennsylvania. He's joining us from Beijing. Welcome. Why do you think there's been this turn this week leading up to these talks? What do you think happened to prompt Trump to go on the offensive, so to speak?
Well, from the reporting that I've read, it basically seems to come down to some structural features in the negotiations that have yet to be resolved that maybe the reporting earlier hadn't fully understood. But more specifically, the Chinese side has come back with some proposed changes to the agreement that would change some of the ways in which the agreement had set up monitoring and implementation and the kinds of commitments that the Chinese side was going to put into Chinese law. And that seems to have provoked a negative reaction on the side of the U.S. negotiators. And in turn, that got passed on to President Trump, who then proceeded with the tweet that all of us have been kind of processing for the last few days.
This is sort of a common gambit by the U.S. president, though, the threats in advance of trying to work out some sort of deal. So what can we expect?
Well, it's interesting. From an American standpoint, I think, given the way that we've understood how President Trump operates, it did seem as if President Trump was basically just putting some pressure on the negotiations as they were still continuing more or less in the way as before. But being in Beijing this week, I've found that many Chinese interlocutors here interpreted that tweet as potentially provoking bigger change in the negotiations than maybe the American side had anticipated. And as of right now, it's very unclear. I don't think that any of us can predict with confidence what happens tomorrow. Will these new tariffs go into effect? Will they not? I did think there was a chance that Liu He would cancel his visit to Washington, but that seems to continue to go on as before. And so it's a very fluid situation. I think we're all watching this in real time, and we'll just have to see what happens tomorrow.
What would a continuation of the trade war mean, not just for these two countries, but also the global economy?
Well, so there's a couple of points here that I think are important to emphasize. First is, even if there is a trade agreement, it will not resolve all of the tensions in the U.S.-China economic relationship. In some ways, the trade agreement that's been anticipated will simply institutionalize some of that conflict. So I understand that on both sides there's going to be some interesting signaling that happens if there is a trade agreement, but the trade war in some sense will continue. That said, if there's no agreement in the near future, the next question would be, can the markets on both the Chinese side and our U.S. market, other Western markets, anticipate a trade agreement coming sometime in the near future? And in that case, then I don't think there will be, just the same way that the Western markets haven't reacted too negatively to this latest development, I think there will still be more stability. But if the message that eventually gets through the markets is that there's not going to be any kind of agreement and the trade war will continue at a maximum level of maximum tariffs on both sides, then we could start to see some major instability. But I think we're very far away from that right now.
So you've shown us a lot of options. What's your sense? What do you think is going to happen?
I think the interesting thing is that there's real pressures on both President Trump and President Xi to make a deal, but at the same time, there are real pressures on both of them not to make a deal. And so for both of them, they have to navigate a very tricky domestic political situation. In both cases, neither one of them wants to see major instability in world financial markets. So my guess is that on the whole, the desire not to have major instability in world financial markets and the desire to show there's some kind of a deal will eventually generate a deal. But again, like I said earlier, the deal is not going to resolve all the different kinds of conflicts in the U.S.-China trade relationship. At most, it will institutionalize some of those conflicts and generate some kind of new mechanisms for monitoring them. And we're going to continue to see tensions in the relationship, the economic relationship, as well as other aspects of the relationship for many years to come.
And if we know anything from the reporting here in Washington, it's whoever speaks to the president last, who gets that last word in, that's what direction he may go in.
Right. And the thing is that, there are various sorts of voices in the administration, but most of them have tended to be clear that they wanted to provoke some kind of major changes in how the Chinese government approaches its economy. But on this side, there seems to be a lot of reluctance to make those kinds of changes. And so the question is going to be, can they reach some kind of sufficient middle ground against those two poles to at least have some kind of agreement, even though we understand that the agreement is not going to resolve that problem and will simply kick the can further down the road.
Well, we'll leave it there. Neysun, thanks so much for your time.